Welcome again to Joe Stunner Boxing. Just a few further thoughts on Errol Spence, because I'm hearing a lot of this talk about how Spence should not take the rematch with Bud Crawford. If he does, he'll take a beating. It could be a health and safety thing here. It might finish his career. Crawford's got his number. Even if it's at 154, Crawford will be stronger because Crawford, after the fight, said he would prefer it at 154. The idea is that Spence will have more, his body will be replenished more, he'll have more power, he'll have more physical strength, it might improve his timing and so on. The same could be true for Crawford. So I understand those arguments, I honestly do. And I would certainly pick Crawford to beat Spence again at 154. I picked Crawford to win on points on Saturday, and I did not predict that it would be as one-sided as it was. But in fairness, a lot of people I know and a lot of people who subscribe to this channel picked Crawford to win by stoppage. Well done to you. I mean, you saw something coming that I didn't. In a rematch, even at 154, I would think that Crawford would stop Spence again. But look, I think Spence has to take the rematch, okay? It's not good for his health, but the thing is, I'm thinking long term about not just his career, but how he will reflect on his career when it's over and how he will move forward with his life, which is always a difficult thing for retired boxers to do if he doesn't take the rematch. If he takes this rematch and he gets beaten again, as most of us expect him to, he can at least say, look over his shoulder when his career's done and say, well, Crawford had my number, but you know what, I fought like a man, I fought to the end. And yeah, it rankles with me that I lost twice. But at least I can say, well, you know, I did my damnedest. I left it all in the ring. I was a true warrior. If he doesn't take the rematch, he's always going to curse himself for not doing that. It's always going to haunt him. He's going to think, damn, I took a beating in front of the world, a real one-sided beating. And I had the chance to come back and rectify that. And I turned it down. And that would haunt him. So I think that Spence has to take this rematch for his own. When people say, well, he shouldn't go anywhere near Crawford again, I understand that, and I kind of agree. But just as a man, who's got another, 50 years left on the planet, he's going to have to take the rematch to put his mind at peace, to make sure that it isn't a major signpost regret in his life. Because it could be. Imagine if Lennox Lewis hadn't taken the rematch with Hasim Rockman. I know it's a different scenario because, Rockman was getting beaten up in that first fight and then he chinned Lewis. But imagine if, let's think of another example. It's difficult to think of examples that compare to this one because the Crawford beating was so conclusive, but whichever example you want to pick, if a fighter turns down the chance of a rematch, Joshua against Usyk is a recent one. Usyk clearly won the first fight. He didn't quite give Joshua the beating that Crawford gave Spence. But if you look at that first fight, in those final moments, that last 30 seconds of that first fight with Usyk was absolute living hell for Joshua. And in fact, if there'd been a 13th round, he wouldn't have come out for it. He was conclusively beaten. And he took the rematch and lost again. But at least Joshua can say, I know he had the meltdown and everything, but at least when all the dust settles, he can say, I did my best and Usyk's just a brilliant fighter. Well, Spence needs to do the same for his long-term peace of mind. And yes, it's risky. And yes, he could well get hurt. I understand all these arguments. I'm not denying them. But I think he's got to do it as a man, really. And as a competitor, as a warrior. because people will look back on Spence's. If he takes that rematch and loses it again, re, uh, people will look back on his career and say, you know what, Errol Spence was a damn good fighter. I mean, he lost to Bud Crawford twice, but hey, if he doesn't take the rematch, people will say, well, he got such a good hiding that he didn't even take the rematch. That's how conclusively he was beaten, and that will be a black mark against him not taking the rematch. Um, I think his career and his legacy rests on whether he wants to fight Crawford again. If he does and he loses, yes, it will put him down the pecking order in terms of legacy, but he'll still be very high. He'll still have a high legacy because he's a very, very good fighter, Errol Spence. A very good fighter. Um, and I've heard people say, well, you know, the car crash and everything, and yes, it takes it out of you, but people weren't saying this stuff when he beat Ugas. He looked brilliant against Ugas, and Ugas is a pretty good fighter, and he's a big welterweight as well. Okay, you know, Danny Garcia, he looked very, very good against Danny Garcia, Spence did. But, you know, he's a smaller man, Garcia, so you can say, well, he should be doing that to a much smaller man. I get that. But yes, the weight may have played a factor in the defeat, but I think even if I think the problem here is that Spence would have had a better chance if he'd fought Crawford before Crawford settled into the weight division, and Crawford most certainly has settled into the weight division. Every single welterweight fight he's had has ended in knockout. Whereas perhaps if Spence pre-car crash had taken on Crawford shortly after he'd moved into the division, he'd have had a better chance of winning. You know, this is all hypotheticals, but yeah, just a few thoughts. I just think Spence must take the rematch for his own long-term peace of mind. And when I say long-term, I'm talking decades. I'm talking the idea of looking back at your career in 30 or 40 years' time. If he doesn't take the rematch, it will haunt him. So those are my thoughts on Spence. Further thoughts, I guess you'd say. Leave yours below. I'd like to hear your opinions. And yeah, I'll answer them as always. Thank you for your time. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, and if you could hit the like button. Build up Joe Stunner Boxing. Let's get some more subscribers on. Tell all your friends. Spread the word about the channel. I much appreciate that. And we'll speak again soon. Bye for now.